Hello again. On the last video I did, I used some scrap pieces that I had and made tea light holders, and I'll put a link to that in the description. But I had one piece left that was this size, this thing, and I decided on this to try my hand at making Celtic knots. I've never done that before, so you get to see what I decide to do and whether it works or not. So this is the piece of wood that I'm going to use. I glued on a piece of scrap here on the back, and that will be the tenon, so that I will have a full symmetrical piece here to make what I want to make. On the YouTube videos I've seen, one thing they stress is that you need to have the pieces that you're making your Celtic knot out of contrasting wood. So I have this piece of scrap that I got. I think I got it at Rockler from their cutoff bin, and it is good contrasting wood, so I will use this to make the strips. And here is what I'm going to make here. And I thought what I would do is make a bud vase out of this. So have something that would kind of go like this and come in here and then out just a little bit. Like that. Probably not quite so far in because I want to have some work there, some room for the test tube that will go in. And so you can put water in it. So that's the basic design I'm going to have. I'm using my white pica pen, since this is a darker wood, to make some things. So I would suggest, I would think between here and about here is where I want to make the Celtic knot. And I will make a square line here and one here. Now, everybody said the thing to do is make sure your layouts are the same all the way around, so I will be taking this all the way over. And if I've done this right and the blank is as square as I think I made it, these should line up, and they do pretty much. It's good enough for what we're going to do here. Yes, that's good. Now, the next thing they said is to number each face of this. So that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, and that's 4. Because you're always going to work on opposite ends as you're doing the work on this. These Celtic knots are 99% sawing and gluing and very little turning. But what I see, they should turn out. So what I'm going to do on this is make, they say make diagonal lines. That's going to be your guide. And since I'm going to be running these on the table saw, I'm going to use this part as by my fence. I'm not going to make a jig. A lot of people make jigs for these. I'm going to use my miter fence to do this because I don't want to spend the time to make a jig. So since this is going to go in first and it's going to go like that on a cut, I will make all of my diagonals that way, and I go from corner to corner. I've seen a lot of people who try to make one cut and then another cut, and that makes a nice looking knot, but right now this is my first one, so this is how I'm going to set it up and run it. And now it's time to measure them. The pieces that I will be putting in will go from the corner to corner, except making the cuts on the table saw, I will not cut all the way through. I've seen YouTube videos where people did and YouTube videos where people didn't. And if they cut all the way through, then they have to align while they're gluing, and it's a diagonal joint while you're doing that. It's a pain. So what I've seen other people do is they leave about an eighth of an inch on the saw blade is cutting this way, and they leave about an eighth of an inch on the top so that that doesn't cut all the way through, and then they put the insert in, and as they turn it down, it'll go past that and make the knot. I think that's the best way to go, so that's what I'm going to do. So the length of each of the strips I'm going to cut has to be, this is 3 and this is just under 3.5 inches. Since I'm going to leave an eighth of an inch off, that's 3 1/4 inches. So I have to make each strip 3 1/4 inches. As I cut the strip, they need to be 3 1/4 inches wide. And 2 and roughly 1/2 inches the other dimension. So 3 1/4 is what I will be, is how I will cut this blank. I'll cut a piece of this blank 3 1/4 inches tall. And I'm cutting them with the grain. This grain here, as it goes in, will be going into end grain, but I don't want to make these end grain pieces because they would be very fragile. So I'm going to cut them as long grain. The next thing I have to do is make the thin strips that are going to go here, and they're going to be the same width as the table saw kerf cut, and I'm going to make them out of this. So I'll work on this off camera for a few minutes, get it squared up and everything. One more thing, I'm going to obviously I have to cut the strips, but I want to cut them first and get them all set up so that when I start cutting these diagonals on this blank, it will be, I'll have to set the saw up for that, and I'm going to leave the saw alone. I don't want to change the saw at all, because I will make one cut and then put the strip in, clamp it up, let it dry for a day. Then the next day I flip it over to the other side, do its strip, and if I don't mess the saw up between those two, I don't have to reset it, so it'll always be the same. That's why I'm doing everything on the strips first, and then I start working on this. Hello from editing. Before we continue with making the thin inserts that will go into these kerf cuts, let's discuss aspect ratios. As you can see from this graphic, the aspect ratio between the height and the width of the blank determines what the final shape of the Celtic knot will be. A tall, thin layout results in a tall, skinny knot. When the height is less than the width, you get a short, fat knot. And in-between ratios result in different-looking knots. There is no standard aspect ratio for making these knots. It's all up to you and your artistic sense. Now to manufacturing the inserts, which was a pain to do. I'm calibrating my thin rip jig using pieces of scrap. I made a kerf cut in another piece of scrap. That one's a little too thick, so I'm going to be fussing with my thin rip jig. I didn't show that on camera. But eventually I get it down to where I want it, and then start making the cuts in the money blank. Because this is wider than my blade is high, I have to go through both directions. I just needed 2 blanks for the job here, and I checked each one as I cut them, make sure nothing changed. I'm sanding each one of them because I wanted to make sure they stayed at the same thickness all the way through. I'm cutting both blanks at the same time so that they are all the same width. I'm setting up the depth of the cut for the main blank. I want it about 1/8 of an inch below the top of the blank. In hindsight, it probably should have been 3/32 or maybe as little as a 1/16. Next time I do one of these, I'll probably make it thinner so that the blank will flex a little bit as I'm putting the pieces in. I've made all the setups on the saw and I'm making the first cut. I will not touch the setups on the table saw until I've gotten everything done, all 4 sides. This is standard gluing, although I have to glue both sides of the blank. I like to use a silicone brush to spread that out. And a little gentle persuasion. Now for clamping, I'm doing 1 clamp on the vertical and then 2 clamps on the horizontal since it's a diagonal joint. This worked well on the big pieces, but you'll see I'm trying to make some smaller pieces, thinner blanks. It didn't work so well with those. That's day 1. See you tomorrow. This is day 2. I'm using the bandsaw to cut the overage. And then I'll sand them smooth completely before I make the next cut. This one didn't fit, probably because it got moisture in the air. So to help it along, I made a fulcrum with a couple of pieces of triangular wood that I have and bent the blank over it, and that opened the curve enough to get this in. Since this is a practice piece, I decided to also put in some thinner blanks, which would be roughly the width of the bandsaw blade. So I'm cutting those now. I'll set up the bandsaw for those. And I didn't make my own thin strips. I bought some veneer from Rockler. We have a Rockler store here about 20 miles away. It's real easy to get to. And then I did keep these together in the bag because they would warp even more than the other one did. So, same difference. Glue it, spread the glue, both sides, put it in, clamp it, and do it all over again for 3 more days. Okay. Actually, after several days, a couple of 3 weeks, interspersed with other stuff that I do, I've got the inserts in, the big ones and the little ones. The little ones did not get laid out the way I was originally looking for, but they may work. We're going to find out once I get it on the lathe. For insurance on my glue jobs, I flooded all the joints with thin CA, and I'm now just taking off the overage on that before I start shaping this piece. Now I'm using my parting tool to cut a reference groove that will be to the depth that I want the neck of this piece to be, so that I won't take it down too far and then there won't be room for the test tube that goes in. I'm using the technique to cut a cove here, although this will not be a textbook cove when we get it all done, but it is still a kind of a cove. And now the other side, same way. I figured out what the black shadow parts are. They're not shadows, they're actually holes where the clamping did not work as well as it should have. So this is an error in clamping, and this is the last of the fill-ins. I filled them in with medium CA, and I will now be sanding and finishing this piece, and then I will do the drilling. But it's a practice piece, so I'm doing some extra stuff on technique to keep my skill levels up. I'm using my round-headed carbide tool to make final shaping decisions here. I like that technique. Others don't, but I like it. Now going through the grits on the sanding. I won't show you all that. For finish, I'm using Howard's Feed and Wax. I really like how it made this pop. The wood I'm using is extremely dry, so it's really soaking in, and so I'm putting a lot on. And I will let it dry for a little bit, buff it out, take off the excess and buff it out. Now for drilling the hole, I'm starting with a twist bit. That's to drill a core, makes it easier for the Forstner bit to remove its chips. And you're not seeing all the times I bring the drill bit out to take the shavings off of it. Now it's the Forstner bit, same thing. It came out several times to clear and back in, but I didn't show you that. I decided to sculpt the inside of the opening, make it a little bit more artistic. I decided that later, that's why I had it all finished, but no biggie here. I'll get it all finished there. And then I'll sand it, going through the grits. I'm sanding to about 400 on this. Now a little more of the Howard's Feed and Wax. It's not the best thing I've ever made, but I learned a lot with the Celtic Knots. One lesson is don't try to nest the Celtic Knots because they don't quite nest very well, as you can see here. Came close, but not quite good enough. Also, the test tubes that I have are too long. I don't have a drill that will go all the way down. So I need to get some long shank drill bits. I have some extensions, but the extension is the size of the drill bit, so it will not fit in the hole. So I'm gonna have to get some long shank 16 and 17 millimeter drill bits. Anyway, my wife likes it, so it's going on the mantelpiece.